This week in Pure Reinvention.
What I've noticed in my life, and as I've become more active in the community, the more I connect, the more that becomes possible.
Episode 90, Carrie Ramirez, Senior Manager, EHS Audits, General Motors.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, where we create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. I want to welcome our co-host for the next 4 podcasts, Jody Parker. Jody, welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
Jody is an individual that I met about a year ago. She participated in our We Invent cohort, our women's only Pure Reinvention group, and I was very inspired by the journey that Jody has gone on and, in fact, has completely embraced the 5 steps to Pure Reinvention. And Jody will really look forward to the comments that you make regarding some of our podcasts for the next month. We had a chance to talk to a friend of yours, Jody, Carrie Ramirez, who is also applying Pure Reinvention. What do our listeners need to be listening for when they start to listen to this podcast?
That Pure Reinvention is not always easy. Sometimes you have some uncomfortable situations, and learning how to navigate those is something that, pay attention to, because this will help you on your journey.
As Jody said, I think that what we've learned from Carrie is applying this in her role at General Motors within her department. And I think some of the things that Carrie will be sharing are things that we all can take with us and apply. And I think that's really special. So let's listen.
This week's episode is sponsored by HRM Services, providing solutions that work. HRMS provides customized human resource consulting services to fit the unique needs of their clients. Every client has a story, and they make it their business to learn yours. Contact HRM Services today at 517-974-8033 or visit their website at hrmservices.biz.
Carrie, welcome to Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, we have to ask those 3 basic questions. Of the 5 steps in the reinvention process, which step do you most closely associate yourself with?
If I think about the first one, it'd be simplify. I really understand the whole idea of simplifying things down into the basic questions and the basic concerns and getting to the root cause. But the other one that probably is more fun for me is the connect part. And I find that I'm pretty good at making connections and drawing, whether it's connecting the dots in the program itself or connecting people. I'm pretty good at finding those connections.
And what is your superpower, Carrie?
I'm really good at knowing what needs to be done or what people need at a given time and getting it for them. And I don't mean, being someone's slave or subject to that, but I mean, if someone needs a meal, I find a way to get them a meal. And if someone needs directions, I get them good directions. And if someone needs the right business at the right time, I can usually connect them to that. So it's probably part of that whole connection element that appeals to me from the steps to begin with.
Sure. So your superpower is putting it all together.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard, though, because then you see things coming and you feel like you see the train wreck far beyond and before the train wreck actually.
Well, the good news is
there.
you've got time to help those train wrecks become smooth train rides.
There you go. Let's hope.
And then the third question is, Carrie, when is the last time you found yourself in an uncomfortable situation?
I would say that's happened a couple of times over the last 6 to 8 months. In particular, I was working on a project with our Board of Education, and I found myself originally in the uncomfortable position of being thrust into the area of spokesman for the parents. And that is not me. I've never even been to a board meeting before I'm put in the spotlight. So that was definitely uncomfortable. The other thing that was uncomfortable along the way is seeing how the changes we were going through affected people that I truly respect, and how they interact with each other. So I was in some uncomfortable situations where I had to adjust how I approached people because of the work I was doing with the board and the efforts I was making on the behalf of our elementary kids. So That's probably a couple of different options I could choose from in there.
Let's talk about how you became aware of the concept of pure reinvention to begin with.
To be honest, it was the board work that connected me. Through the board discussions and some really difficult things about what was happening in the school district, I got connected to Jody Parker, who is a big fan. And then she connected me both to you and also to Pure Reinvention. And it's one of those things where it was like the perfect storm of language coming together with what I was experiencing in my personal life and my professional life, kind of all coming together and giving me a way to talk about it.
So in discovering, right, through this situation, the work of Pure Reinvention, you've actually, to my understanding, have found ways to apply those concepts even past your project with the school board. You've even been able to apply that within your regular job.
I would say it's not even just in my regular job. I would say it's also in my personal life. So if I start with my job, that was the easy one. As an environmental health and safety auditor, I see different elements where those steps come into play, whether it's the company as a whole or in my individual work. And so it gave me a way to, in particular in my own team, talk about what I was trying to do. So the company has gone through a major disruption. From that, we've learned a lot and we're really making some amazing changes. And my team in particular embraced that. And so when I saw the language of the steps and the process, it really applied to what I was doing at work, where we had identified a problem and we were really working through how do we move the company forward in my particular little space to try to make things connect better, make more sense, be clearer, be simpler, just move forward in a new way that made it easier and better for everyone. And so it really was kind of, again, I keep saying the perfect storm, but it's one of those things where you think the universe gets involved and brings everything together at the right time.
So you now have made reference to the fact you're using this somewhat in your personal life as well. So I'm curious to know how, because I get a sense that maybe that is even the more important place where you're seeing application.
Yeah, and I think, I guess on the personal side, one thing that has always been important to me is to move forward in how I interact with people and how I look at the world. And I've had some serious disruptions in my life. My dad passed away at a very young age. He was 56. I also had situations where we've lost children. And in each of those disruptions, and I guess one more, my mother-in-law was in a very serious accident. And in each of those disruptions, I can point back, now that I have the words, to see how I had naturally gravitated towards those steps. So we had the idea of, I'll use my dad's death as an example. That was a major disruption. It was a situation where it was unexpected. My mom didn't cope well, and we were all just trying to get through it together. And so the first thing we did was kind of simplify the problems, to be honest. My mom was living an hour away. Dealing with the emotional end of having lost my dad was really difficult. And so ultimately, without really talking about it or discussing it, we had her move in because that took away the hour distance. It took away the hour calls in the evenings, and we could just be constantly supportive. We joke now that it wasn't really discussed, it just happened.
Right.
But I think somewhere it was part of the process. And then, as we moved forward, again, I think the connect part, I can see that clearly because we did our best to connect to each other, given that my dad was no longer there to connect us together, but also to connect my mom to other things and to try to make her connect with the world. And so that took a serious process to get there. And I think we're still in that end phase of moving. I think even 9 years later, we still see opportunities to move forward, to keep changing, to adjust where we're going, and just keep on the track. So I can see where, looking back, I didn't have the words for it, but now I do.
How important it is to know, not only just know the steps, but be able to recognize the progress you're making when you're dealing with a challenge.
I think that there's a couple things at work there. On the personal side, one of the things I think is really important to teach my kids and to remind myself is that life happens. So that disruption step happens over and over and over again. And if you're not able to embrace it and figure out where to go with it afterwards, then you're in trouble.
So in other words, you view disruption as the opportunity step to be able to look at it where short term it may be a negative, but it creates that space and that opportunity to go forward.
Yeah, short term, there's no question, it stinks. A lot of times it just stinks.
Right.
But every single time I've been through one of these changes, it's taken me to a new and better place. And I have the same experience at work. So, we've been through a pretty tough time in GM over the last, say, 8 years, if you want to go back as far as bankruptcy. But we've continuously moved forward with a vision, and it really followed the steps of figure out what needs to be done and connect the dots and follow the path all the way across. In my own job, I can see so many opportunities. And of course, I first want to just charge ahead and get it done. But realistically, that's not going to be sustainable, and it's not going to get people where they need to be from a knowledge perspective or from, a total understanding. So you have to take it step by step in order to make the change sustainable, to make it consistent, and to make it stick.
So you now, in a lot of the work that you're doing, end up being the coach to a lot of people, your children, your family, your employees, in helping them navigate through reinvention, through the discussion of the steps. What kind of reaction do you get from individuals as you're walking them through these steps and helping them navigate along the way?
So the reaction, I would say, is overwhelmingly positive when people are ready. When I brought up these concepts at work, a couple of people in particular who really see the big picture and get excited about the possibilities, they grabbed it immediately. Got out there, started looking at the podcast, started looking at the definitions, would occasionally mention to me, hey, I think that's the connect step, or that's, the move or whatever. Those people that are ready, grab it. And it's like a breath of fresh air because it's, again, to me, it seems like you're giving language to something that is naturally there. You have to go through these process steps in some way, shape, or form in life. The ones that are a little less accepting are the ones that really haven't accepted the disruption in the first place. It's the ones that say that really want it to go back to how it was, and even though it never will, it is what it is. So I can kind of see that in the board meeting and the education side thing that we've done. We've tried to keep a school open, and it's not going to stay open. But it didn't take me long to say, okay, that's done. And really what I love about that school is how much community it brings together, and all of the people that are part of the school through the families and getting them together in the area, because we live in the country and it's hard to get people close together. When your kids want to go to a friend's house, it's a drive. So immediately my thoughts turned to, okay, what could we do with this building that keeps that feeling and keeps that portion of it that's the right thing to do without it being a school? And so we, Jody Parker and I came up with this idea of creating a community center where we could bring together things that are really needed in our area. Some as simple as tutoring and access to the internet for those that are doing online classes. There's a lack of after school care and preschool and easy availability of things for the kids to do. And we thought of all sorts of fun stuff that could be made from this school building, including outdoor movies and batting cages and camps in the summer. And we're moving that forward and making it happen.
Talk about how connecting gives us the opportunity to create community.
What I've noticed in my life, and as I've become more active in the community, the more I connect, the more that becomes possible. And when more becomes possible, people get excited and they want to be around each other, and friendships get formed, and organizations pop up, whether they're formal or informal, where you're helping each other. You really are becoming a community. And so I say that kind of, I can kind of connect that in a picture, in the sense that I got involved in the board. I never thought I would do that. It created the opportunity for me to talk to people I had never talked to before and thought I never would. It connected me to other parents. It connected me to some of the manufacturers and other influential people in the community that were interested in things that I was interested in. It takes away that idea that you're alone, that your ideas are nuts, that you can't get this done. And suddenly it becomes, yeah, we can do this. And it could be awesome. And we should just try.
Is the connected step an inbound activity or an outbound activity?
I would say it's both. The reason I say that is because you have to take in what you have and start where you are,
so that's the inbound part.
That's the inbound part, knowing what you have in front of you and what you're starting with.
Mm-hmm. The identification of the assets that you have around you.
Yeah, whether it's people or places or, opportunities, whatever, you have to know what your input is. Mm-hmm. But then it becomes an output thing. So as you start to try to connect, you end up with this huge network. It's almost like a web that gets bigger and introduces you to things you never thought you'd be introduced to in your normal life. It gets you out of that little bubble that's your house or that's your school or whatever, and gets you into a lot more things that you just never thought you would do.
But open up so many new doors.
Exactly. So I think it's both.
Do you think at times a lot of people are fearful to take those initial first steps to pure reinvention, but certainly the connect step?
Yeah, I think each of the steps can be terrifying if you're, depending on your personality and your experiences. Disruption is always terrifying, to me anyway, because I'd love things to be calm and normal and simple, but they never are. With the connect step, I think a lot of people are afraid to connect. They're afraid that other people will think that they have bad ideas or think that they're too far out there.
So they're afraid they're going to be judged.
Absolutely.
The real point of the connect step is to get past the judging to the opportunity to create that special and unique place that maybe doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, I think when people judge, they're really showing you that they're afraid too. And so sometimes you have to get all the way to the point of proving that it works before the judgment goes away. Mm-hmm. And that takes courage. There's no question. But when you have a community to rely on, if it's a community of people that think and think like you in some ways, but also complement what you have to offer, it's easy to get over that.
There's a really interesting concept right there for leaders to consider, which is when you can break down a major task into the 5 steps of reinvention, it helps people to see that it's more bite-sized chunks. It helps people wrap their focus in a specific area for that time. So while the leader may understand those steps, the ability to focus everybody on the step at hand and make sure we don't get steps too far ahead, you've actually enlightened me on the value of how leaders can really apply this. And I sense that's what you're doing within your own work is and now moving into a teaching mode, is by teaching it, you break it down, you simplify it, and people can comprehend it.
Yeah, it's funny that you use the bite analogy, because I can't tell you how many times I've said just, how do you eat an elephant? It just really sums it up, because so many of the things that we have to accomplish are huge. They feel huge. Sometimes they're not as huge as they feel. But if you start thinking too far ahead, you freak yourself out. And so if you can think of it as step by step, I know I may not get it perfect the first time around, but then I can adjust and come back. So probably after the move step, you've got adjustments, right? If you really wanted to add another step, not that you do. But I think that's where people get caught up, is they think it has to be perfect on the first try. And that's not really true. I mean, if you take it step by step, you'll get there. It's just slower than sometimes you want.
Carrie, this has been phenomenal. This has been Carrie Ramirez, Senior Manager, Environmental Health and Safety Audits for General Motors. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Jody, this was really an outstanding interview that Carrie gave us.
It was.
So as you had a chance to listen to some of the real wisdom that Carrie shared, Jody, can you help us kind of hone in on some real key bullet points? For example, I heard her say, the more I connect, the more is possible. What was Carrie really trying to communicate there?
When you're trying to navigate a situation, it's very difficult to do on your own. When you have other people who can support you and who can give you ideas and who can help you out, it makes the situation much easier to handle. It makes the process easier to navigate. Team effort really helps you accomplish something much faster, much easier, much more efficiently.
So the connect stage becomes critically important in encouraging more involvement because that's the fuel that allows the robustness to continue to grow.
Yes.
Carrie, I think, also mentioned that there are many times when she finds herself in an uncomfortable situation. Is it your sense as well that people sometimes don't do things because they're uncomfortable?
I think if people wanted to avoid being uncomfortable, they would never try anything new. But certainly with things such as PureReinvention, it's expected that there are going to be some uncomfortable situations, and learning to navigate those and learning to rebuild your relationships and learning how to move on from those uncomfortable situations is all part of the process.
And one of the things that really impressed me that Carrie talked about is if you think about a task that's overwhelming, we sometimes get afraid and we don't do it. And Carrie has some very simple ideas to help us focus on small steps. Why small steps?
Because when you look at the big picture, it's very overwhelming. But when you take that big picture and you start breaking it down and you start separating the pieces, suddenly it's not so big and overwhelming. You tackle one step at a time. And as you tackle each step, you're getting closer and closer to the end without even realizing it.
You've actually created a very manageable environment over what appeared to be a daunting task. Carrie also talked about the importance of change in today's environment, and that we really individually need to be prepared for change. Why?
Change is inevitable. And if you take in what's going around you, it's happening very rapidly. You can either be prepared for change, accept change, or you can be unprepared for it. And those who are prepared for it, who embrace it, manage it much better than those who aren't ready for it, who don't embrace it.
So if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts.
Yes.
Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.